Mike's muted, please.
Oh, wait.
Control D. Yeah! Welcome to another episode of the Superhero Movie Club, a community of superhero fans. All nerds welcome, but please wipe your feet at the door. I'm your comic book cultured host, Michael Maurer, joined in the proverbial studio by Movie Maestro,
James Skylar Hutzma.
scientific scholar,
Ben Anderson.
and special guest returning for the third time on SHMC podcast, our doctor friend.
Dr. Amy Lauders.
Welcome
Woo!
again, Amy.
Hey, glad to be back. Woohoo!
Easily the most certified and qualified member to ever grace this podcast.
That's saying something, so thank you for that.
SHMC is your premier movie discussion podcast. Every week, we continue our journey exploring our favorite subject, superhero movies. Every fan sees the movies differently, so we gather some amateur experts to discuss certain aspects of the movie.
Whether it's money, comic books, science, or music, SHMC talks about it all in this week's episode. Hellboy 2, The Golden Army. And yes, there will be spoilers.
Okay, we're going to start with first opinions on the movie as a whole. I think we will talk to the person who knows the least about this film first, and that would be Ben.
Yeah, I get this movie confused with the first Hellboy because I didn't watch it before actually doing this. I saw it a couple of years ago. And I was like, oh yeah, Hellboy, there were Nazis in it, and an artificial intelligence. And then I read the plot synopsis, and I was like, huh, I thought there were at least Nazis in it. But that turns out it was the first Hellboy. So I've definitely seen this one, but it apparently didn't make much of an impression on me.
Oh, that's a shame. Go ahead, Skylar.
Also, like Ben, it's been several years since I watched this movie. I did my best to refresh on it, but in the process, I do remember enjoying it quite a bit. It's very fun, breezy, and I was, and still am, impressed with the level of imagination filmmakers like Guillermo del Toro have in just bringing these kind of fantasy elements to life. So, while it's not one of the most memorable superhero movies we'll talk about, it's still fairly well done.
And go ahead, Amy.
Well, I like, I had to refresh my memory as to which Hellboy this was too. And of course, the takeaway I had when you asked me about it was, oh, isn't that the one where the girlfriend says she's pregnant in the end? I don't know why that's what struck me. Maybe that's a girl thing. I don't know. But I thought it was for a sequel, it was a decent sequel, and it was a rich story. There was a lot to this particular film, so it's one that I'd see again just for the popcorn value. Frankly, it was a good story.
Yeah. I mean, I watched this one right before we were recording this, and I gotta say, this movie is a hidden gem of sorts, in that it's very forgotten among just the general like movie-going populace, and we'll kind of talk about why that is in a little bit. But Hellboy 2 is this it's very on par with the first one. It's just this creative, imaginative tale, and when you watch it, like a big thought that has to go through your head is, holy cow, they worked the prosthetic and costume teams to death. Like there is barely a person who is in a normal outfit. Your two like main characters are, first of all, Ron Perlman in that Hellboy suit. That thing's got to weigh at least like 60 pounds of just crap on him. And then you have Doug Jones in the Abe Sapien costume. And then, of course, all of the elves have the giant pale face. I mean, Selma Blair just drew the long stick here, and just never having to just give her some basic foundation, good to go.
No, I think that's Jeffrey Tambor, who just
Yeah.
shows up and does his best Jeffrey Tambor.
Yeah, oh, you're driving me crazy, Hellboy. This is his role in the film. But this is just Guillermo del Toro off the leash. You know, everything is this wonderful mystical fantasy world. You hardly go a scene where it's not some sort of imagination moment, or it's just not some sort of weird cog clockwork imagery is being shown, or someone's not in a costume of some sort that looks really damn good. Um, and I just got to say, like, this is just an impressive film that was made. The story is rock solid. It doesn't delve too deep into like the personal feelings of the characters, but in just terms of a fantasy tale that has a beginning, middle, and end, very, very nice to follow and fun to watch. Really, it's just a good movie. But what's a shame about this is that Hellboy doesn't get a lot of love with the money. In fact, Guillermo del Toro doesn't get a lot of love with the money. Skylar, hit me up with some money stats.
Sorry, I just had a quick side note on this. I do remember back when this movie came out, thinking, I remember thinking, oh, cool, Seth MacFarlane's in a movie. And then fast forward 7 years later, and it's like, ugh, Seth MacFarlane's in a movie. He voiced the Johann guy.
Yes,
that's right.
Johann Strauss Cross.
Something or other, yeah.
By
Okay,
the way, a Nazi, just so you weren't completely wrong.
Okay,
Nice.
what the fuck is happening with my goddamn mute button? Yeah, okay, I wasn't totally off base then. There's at least one Nazi in this movie.
A reformed Nazi scientist.
Okay, yeah.
Because we can't have a Nazi that's not reformed.
It's on the good guy side.
Right, exactly. Okay.
I'll expect more Nazis for Hellboy 3 if it ever gets made. Anyway, back on track for money. Production budget on Hellboy 2 was $85 million, so that's fair. It's kind of surprising considering the level of prosthetics they used. You'd think that would have added up to a lot more, but c'est la vie.
Well, I mean, like, for a film that's not grounded in realism at all, $85 million is that's a budget.
It is, and they clearly made the best out of it. Domestic gross ended up being $75.9 million. Elsewhere in the world, it brought in $84.4 million for a grand total of $160.3 million. So, made its budget back, made Universal a little bit of money. It's a solid opening, but probably just not quite enough for a sequel, as we have seen 7 years later.
Oh, yeah.
Probably didn't help that Dark Knight came out literally the following week.
Yeah. Okay. Hellboy 2 came out July 11th, I believe it was. Did about $35 million its opening weekend, so almost half of its total money in the U.S. came from opening weekend. You know, good, solid. I'm sure people at Universal were patting each other on the back. Dark Knight comes out next week, and it's Hellboy's never heard from again, essentially.
Oh, this movie just got swamped in the behemoth that was Dark Knight 2008.
That movie was a black hole, and it consumed everything in its path, including this one.
Yeah, I mean, that's why that's why you just don't. It's also because Hellboy is such a similar movie to the general audience. Like, if you were given a choice between going to Dark Knight or Hellboy 2: The Golden Army, which you are told are both superhero films, those films are drastically different, but you don't know that going in. You're always going to pick Dark Knight.
Right. It essentially just comes down to which one is the more familiar brand, and Batman will always win that if it's between that and Hellboy. Not to say Hellboy doesn't have its dedicated fans and whatnot, but just pairing the two.
Number one dedicated fan of Hellboy is Guillermo del Toro.
Right, exactly. I'm sure he poured enough of his money into this movie.
Well, I suppose if you're going to have one dedicated fan to a franchise, you could do worse than Guillermo del Toro. I mean, especially with that man's vision. I mean, the whole, and we were just briefly talked about the aesthetically pleasing just beauty of the whole film. That's totally del Toro. And if you're going to have one fan, you might as well have him.
Well, and I say that because if you read some Hellboy collected comics, a lot of collected works will have a foreword by some sort of famous person. A lot of the times it's like Stan Lee or another comic book writer or artist will write a foreword about the collection of comic books you're about to read. And in a lot of the Hellboy collections, it's either Mike Mignola, of course, or it is Guillermo del Toro. And those forwards are so fun to read because it's just Guillermo del Toro fawning over Mike Mignola. Just unending compliments, calling the man a genius, a master of aesthetics, a master of dark and gritty and fantasy.
Well, he's kind of an expert on that, so I would take his word pretty seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Side note, I'm really excited for Crimson Peak.
When's that coming out? In a couple weeks?
Yeah, in like 2 weeks. I just wanted to put that out there.
Okay, so I'm deleting that because it'll be out by the time this gets public. All right.
You're welcome.
So we'll let that. We'll segue. Oh, are you gonna say something, Ben?
I would. Okay, no, we'll talk about this when we get to sequel potential.
Okay.
If we talk about that.
Yeah, we'll get that at the end. I've got a lot of stuff to say on that, a fair amount at least. So let's segue right on into the comic book portion where we talk about where a lot of the inspiration for the film came from in its world of course, superheroes and comic books. And this movie is, like we've discussed, very much Del Toro off the leash, the best of what Guillermo del Toro can do. And when it comes to Hellboy, Hellboy is owned by Dark Horse, but let's make no mistake here, Hellboy is Mike Mignola's creation. When anybody discusses anything Hellboy, it is almost always attributed to him. In fact, there are very rare occasions where he's not a part of the project. All the material, all the Hellboy comics, the Abe Sapien comics, the BPRD comics, they're almost all written and drawn by Mike Mignola. This dude has taken his passion for this character and he has turned it into a franchise just by writing a bunch of stories because that's what he likes to do. His process involves a lot of drawing first, so he's a very art-based guy. A lot of the Hellboy comic books don't have a fair amount of text. Sometimes it'll involve a little text at the beginning describing a lot of folklore. Like he writes comics that are very much monster of the week. Hellboy will walk into a situation and it'll be some folklore that Mike Mignola read or researched at one point in his life, and Hellboy will fight it, and then there'll be some sort of ambiguous lead up to this thing of Hellboy's destiny as destroyer of the world, and then Hellboy will walk away. That's like almost every story, and you know what? They're great because the art is beautiful. It's creepy. It's all get up. And when he finally does build to like a big season finale kind of comic, those are some of the best things I've ever read and looked at in terms of just comic books. But to deal with the movie, oh shit, my microphone fell down. The story of Hellboy 2: The Golden Army. It is mostly developed for the movie. There's no comic book that Mignola wrote that where this storyline gets from. It's a lot of what draws a lot from Gaelic myth and origins, and Guillermo del Toro's brain. And we'll talk more about that. But what does come from the comic books is, of course, characters like Hellboy, Liz, and Abe Sapien, who are the main three. And we'll talk about. I'll go into length about those characters when we get to the first Hellboy movie. But there's one character who gets introduced into this film, who is the somewhat the shining star if you are a Hellboy fan, and that is Johann Kraus. Johann Kraus was created in 2003, and in the movie, he is the guy in the containment suit with the sort of rotating gear mouth that has the little things that sort of click. And he's very stern, that giant, thick German accent voiced by Seth MacFarlane, of all people. Which, honestly, do you guys hear Seth MacFarlane when he does the Johann Kraus voice?
Yes. It's inevitable to hear that.
It really reminds me of the goldfish from American Dad, honestly.
Yeah, okay, because I didn't hear it until I attributed it to the goldfish, or it's Klaus. of American Dad, Johann Kraus, and of course Klaus the Goldfish. But the story of Johann is much different in the comic books, in that, like, they didn't really talk about the story a lot in the movie, but we're going to do a quick synopsis of his origin here. He's a mild psychic who was, of course, born in Germany, and his psychic powers involved talking to the dead. He was just a normal dude, right, with a psychic power, and then eventually he got involved in this seance that went wrong, and he became the only survivor of it. And survivor in a way that the only thing that remained was his ectoplasmic form. And therefore he had to be put into an ectoplasmic suit, containment suit, or else he would dissipate forever. Because it's really hard to keep air together in the world. And when he lost his body, his psychic powers got supremely enhanced. They describe it as like if a blind person loses their sight, their hearing ramps up. And they just sort of said, if a psychic person loses their body, their psychic powers ramp up to the point where now he could possess things without souls. He could give the dead temporary form so that they could talk to non-mediums. And he no longer needs sleep. So he became a workaholic, and that became a major plot point in a lot of the stories, that he would discover things about people because he would just endlessly research things. And in terms of his behavior, it's very different from the film. When you read a Hellboy comic that features Johann Kraus, he's a very compassionate member of the team. He's probably the most compassionate member of the team because he's the character that is closely associated with death. He's the most emotional person because he talks to people who have just died a lot. And, that makes you either a hardened person or just very feeling and poignant. In the movie, he is cold, calculated, waves his finger a lot, reprimands Hellboy for being reckless. In the commentary, Guillermo del Toro describes Johann Kraus as the embodiment of bureaucracy. Or embodiment's probably the wrong word. Also, there are few ambiguous lines in the film that talk about this mysterious wife that he used to have, this ring that he always carries around with him. He even says in the movie, perhaps we'll talk about it at a different time, when there's like 20 minutes left in the film. And in the book, there's no talk about Johann Kraus's wife. I think that was just a nice little ploy to say that he can change. He can become a better person, if person's the right word.
Better manifestation.
A better spirit in the world. And the only other thing I want to kind of talk about that deals with the books is the BPRD. I'm pretty sure they refer to it as the BPRD in the film. They don't refer to it as that often, but that stands for the Bureau for Paranormal Research and Defense. And this is the organization that they all work under, where you get a team like Liz Sherman, Abe Sapien, and Hellboy together. And in the comic books, those are like some of the most fun to read because it's just like, why don't we get it's X-Men but with like adults and folklore and nonsense. It's just another take on a group of misfits who are all just trying to do their best with what they've been given.
Now, does BPRD have its own like comic line of stories? Yeah. Okay, because I see those coming to the store every once in a while, and I was like, "What is this?" But I never realized there was a connection.
Yeah, I mean, it all started with Hellboy books, and then like Hellboy originally started on like the back of a magazine or something at a comic book convention, and then eventually grew into this. It was like a very small comic in a magazine, and it grew into this thing that Mike Mignola just loved coming back to and building and creating this wonderful Anung Un Rama storyline, the beast who will eventually have a crown upon his head, or some sort of translation like that. And it's obviously like an absolutely fascinating story of do you accept destiny, your fate, or can you change it? Which is always just this constant conflict in real life that almost everyone can relate to. And it's just really, really dug deep in Hellboy comics. And that's all I really have to say about that. Like, go out and read them. They're all collected. I'm not sure if Mignola is still working on new stories. I'm sure in some way or another he's working on a story for some of those characters. But they are absolutely great reads, fascinating, and you learn a lot about different 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 mythology, like the what do you call the Russian, the Yaga Baba? Is that what that's called?
It's the Baba
Baba
Yaga.
Yaga, the other
Yeah,
way, yeah.
yeah, the other way around. Baba Yaga. Baba Yaga. That is a frequent character, and you learn a lot about like the culture of how that myth came about, and in a fun way, where it's just like, how does this myth apply to Hellboy and his journey to seek whether or not he is affected by everything around him, or that he can take hold of his own destiny, because he has that right hand of doom that constantly plagues him in his life. But that's all I got to say about comic books. It's just I could talk about Hellboy for a while. I love those books. They're just so much fun, and they're pretty quick to tear through too, because like I said, Magnolia is keen on the artwork, and sometimes you just got to stop and look at it and go, "Damn, that's creepy, dude. That's some creepy stuff." But I digress. Let's move on to the music section, where we have Skylar talk about some music scores that went into the film of Hellboy 2. Take it away.
All right. Music this week on Hellboy 2, composed by everyone's favorite, Danny Elfman, who is no stranger to the superhero score subgenre. Taking over for the sequel from Marco Beltrami from the first film, which is always a good thing. I don't want to dogpile on him for all of this podcast, but yes, I will continue to do that. Music for Hellboy 2, basically what you can expect from a Danny Elfman score, dark, gothic, moments of light in all the mixture, though certainly not to the point of his Tim Burton scores, which are much more wide, varied, all that fun stuff. Let's take a listen to Hellboy 2 titles.
Does Danny Elfman have an obsession with bells?
If I were pressed to answer, I would say yes. He likes his bells, as it were.
Like
But
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
no, go right ahead. I'm just gonna segue into something else, but
Okay, because that's like his signature thing. I mean, like every time you hear like bells and just like dum 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 dum, like it's building to something. You go, is that Danny Elfman?
it's kind
Is he writing about Christmas and Halloween again?
at the same time. No. It's funny you say that because of all the movies Danny Elfman scored in 2008, this one's probably closest to his quote-unquote formula, but it's still a little different, and you'll hear that in the track I've got coming up, the training. But take into account, Hellboy is a little more in his wheelhouse, all being fantasy, kind of that whimsy to it, dark as it may be. Other movies he did that year include Wanted, Standard Operating Procedure, and Milk, the biopic on Harvey Milk. So this was a year where he really kind of spread out and tried new things, but this is a score that's really more familiar to what he does. Let's take a listen to Training.
Danny Elfman's one thing. That dude has job security. I mean, he is a guy that is almost guaranteed to just write you a solid score. It's not maybe it's more times than most other composers it'll blow your socks off, but you can almost be guaranteed that like it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be up there. It's gonna be jovial.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like the guy never disappoints. With this one, I can't say I ever really went out and tried to find it outside the movie, but I do recall that it worked very well in the context of the movie, and that's square one. So
Yeah, that's what you want as
Right.
a movie maker. Is like make it for the movie first, and then for people who like movie scores next. But hold on, this track was called Training. Was there a training moment in the movie where they said they were training for something?
I think it's with the antagonist early on in the film when he's
Oh, okay. When Prince Nuada's dancing around with his sword, flinging,
that's the one.
makes
Yeah.
sense. Okay. Oh shoot! I should have asked you to play whatever the song is that happens right after Hellboy kills the water elemental. Where for a moment it's just like, hey, is everything we're doing here the right way? And then it stops. It actually does still touch on that a few moments later, but like just like the everything in the movie was so upbeat, and then out of nowhere it's like, hey, I know you killed that thing, but dude, think about it. It was the last of its kind. It's like, whoa, when did we take a U-turn into Somberville?
Whoa, man, this was heavy. This was a heavy trip. I can't remember what that song is offhand though. So
Okay. Well, any more on music?
no, it's a little bit of a shorter segment today because this one just kind of gets to the point.
Would you just have you listened a lot to the first Hellboy soundtrack?
No, I haven't actually.
Okay. Then following this next question, how many more Danny Elfman tracks do you think we are going to go through in the superhero world?
On this podcast?
Oh yeah.
Oh my God, so many. So many we've got to get through. At least 2 Spider-Man films, 2 Batman films, and depending on if we do any of the Men in Black films, it's at least still around 10.
He
At
also
least.
did the Flash television series from the 1990s.
Whoa. It's a little more on the outskirts, but
Okay, eventually we're gonna all have to rank our favorite Danny Elfman scores from like
Yeah.
1 to 3. But
I get you.
All three are going to be Nightmare Before Christmas.
all 3 in the superhero world. Now what are they?
Jack Skellington is my superhero.
Very well.
Let's not forget, by the time we even get around to those movies, there will probably be a few more that have come out with Danny Elfman scores.
Of course. Okay, so we're gonna move right on to our science section where we have our scientific scholar Ben Anderson describe as best he can some moments in the film that we can sort of dissect on. Were they doing it right? Did they have some very solid scientific backing, or just taking a topic and exploring it further? So let's start with, first of all, how you doing, Ben?
Doing well. How are you?
Good, good. I'm going to ask you to maybe put the mic a little bit farther away. I think you're coming garbly, and I think that might help things a little bit. But after that,
I'm doing good. How are you?
oh, that's much better.
Oh, good.
And I'm going to ask you first. Let's talk about twins. All right?
Twins first, but that's the best one. I was going to say that for last, but yeah, we can do twins first.
All right then. Let me rephrase the whole thing.
Okay.
'Cause you only have 2 topics, right?
I have 3.
Oh, what's your? You know what? You just take it away.
You know what? No. You can take me through this because you're the one who wrote down what you wanted to talk about.
Well, I thought you didn't want to talk about pyrokinesis.
I
I'll be
never said
honest.
that.
Oh, okay.
I said I don't have much to say on it.
Well, then I don't want to talk about it because
Okay, well, let me say what I have to say on it then. God damn. This should not be this hard.
we are falling apart at the seams here at SHMC.
You're
The
falling
outline has
apart.
destroyed us.
Take a
You're falling
breath.
apart.
All right, fine. Start with pyrokinesis.
Pyrokinesis means you can control fire with your mind. It's not a real phenomenon. Alleged cases have been shown to be hoaxes.
All right. So we're just sort of, what if Liz Sherman had some sort of myth that was based on her that someone could pop a popcorn bag with just their brain?
Yeah. I mean, it's far better just to throw kernels onto your stove.
That's your
And then-
form of pyrokinesis.
Yeah, and then you get shot because there's a SWAT team there. That's a callback.
Yeah, it is, but with bullets.
Yeah, basically. Ectoplasm in the movie, it's some kind of spiritual energy. Woo, new age.
You just jumped ectoplasm on me. All right, keep going.
Oh yeah, that's literally all I had to say about pyrokinesis. Ectoplasm, pretty much the same thing. This so-called spiritual energy made solid or whatever, not a real phenomena. And
Really?
it's oh really, really, really.
Oh, I thought. Oh, okay.
So
well,
if you're-
is it? Oh, go ahead.
if you're at a seance and the medium's like, oh hey, ectoplasm, no, it's just cheesecloth soaked in egg yolk.
Well, what is it? I've heard ectoplasm be described as when people take pictures, and then a lot of dots, like white dots, show up on the picture. That's being described as like there was a spirit there because there's a lot of ectoplasm.
No, that's just you have something wrong with your photo detector and should probably just buy a different camera.
Okay. Okay.
Um,
And or clean the lens. That's a dust motes usually. Just
Yeah, clean the lens first before you replace your all camera.
Okay. Well, I
So-
know we're not claiming to be ghost hunters here.
In the context of real life stuff that happens, ectoplasm is also like the fluid inside your cells.
Oh, okay.
Like the like there's fluid inside your cells, and like the outer layer of fluid is called the ectoplasm, and then the whole of it is called cytoplasm, and ectoplasm is like a particular form of cytoplasm or something. But that's unrelated.
Okay, because like I was sure like ectoplasm was a real thing in some way or another, but
Yeah.
not necessarily paranormal.
Yeah, it's a term in cell biology. It's just fluid inside your cells. It is not as it is in the film. Sorry.
How did
Not sorry.
people, was it just started as like one hoax and then has just stuck on from then on out?
Yeah, basically. So, like when mediums would like give people like readings of the future or whatever, they'd have like just like a wad of cheesecloth or fabric soaked in egg yolk or something, and then they'd just like bring it out in the middle of it when people weren't paying attention and be like, oh, look at this goo that's formed because there's spirits and psychic energy, blah blah blah, and people were convinced. But they're hoaxes.
Oh, all right. Now that makes
Not-
a lot more sense.
Yeah. It also refers to the condensation caused by the shockwave of a supersonic aircraft. The like pressure there causes air to condensate. That's called ectoplasm.
Oh, I thought.
But
those
it's
were-
just
I thought those were microbursts.
yeah. It's a name for that I found looking up things on Wikipedia this morning.
The researcher.
But again, not spiritual energy made physical substance, but rather it's just a cloud. So
Okay. So we have debunked ectoplasm,
Yep.
via our sources, our Wikipedia. Good, good.
Mm-hmm.
We are the staunchest of researchers here.
Oh,
So,
I definitely do my due diligence.
so tell me about your number one topic then, in the world of twins,
Number
because
one.
in the film we had Prince Nuada and Princess Nuala, who had this sort of physical connection where if one got hurt, the other would also get hurt, and they had a mild psychic link of sorts.
I was just going to talk about how twins are used in medical and psychological research because I didn't really want to talk about that at all. But this would be a good time to bring up twin studies,
Yes.
which is a really important way of studying mostly psychology and genetics, where you look at pairs of identical twins and see what's the same and what's different, especially if they live in separate families. So identical twins separated at birth, you can look at how they're different now and use that to assess what traits are genetic, what traits are caused by your environment, and to what degree different traits are influenced by genetics or environment.
The old nature versus nurture study.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Didn't it used to be believed, though, in olden times, that that people who were born as twins had some sort of psychic link? People used to believe that was a real thing, or do they still do?
people still believe that. I don't put much stock in psychic, paranormal, whatevers. But they do have the same genetics if they're identical twins, or if they're fraternal twins, they share on average about 50% of their genes. So that's cool.
Can I
Yeah.
jump in for a quick sec?
Oh yeah,
Sure.
of course.
And this is purely anecdotal. I know for a man of science such as yourself, this may be malarkey and hokum. However, my mom is an identical twin. And there are several times in my childhood when my mom and my Aunt Louise would be nowhere near each other, but having a conversation. We kids in the middle could hear them. They couldn't really hear each other from where they were, but that's just anecdotal. And there were a couple of times when they were taking naps on opposite sides of the house, and we could hear them talking in their sleep, having a conversation. So I wouldn't just discount it altogether. This is just, as I said, anecdotal malarkum and hokum, right? Right? That's what that is. But it does. It's
Well,
it's
I mean,
just saying.
if you have twins are often just closer than other siblings because they're the same age, they grow up together, and so there may be stuff like that happening where they're just they're just closer than average siblings.
So it's again not very much a scientific perspective of because they are born within seconds of each other, therefore there is some mystical attachment to because of their biology, but more of because they are so closely related to each other in just experiencing the same experiences and drawing from the same perspectives because they are growing at the same time. That of course creates a connection, and we don't really know how to fully explain the powers of that bond. Like you said, they would have conversations from across because they just know each other so well that they're able to sort of talk to each other without actually hearing the other person speak.
What would be really cool is experiments with separated twins to see if that same kind of connection would occur. Because my mom definitely grew up with her twins, so that similarity thing, I think there's probably something to that. But if you wanted to discount telepathy between twins, you'd want to do a separated twin study. Just getting back to your point about the twin studies being so important for a lot of reasons.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So my guess is that because your mother and your aunt, right?
Yes, my aunt.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
guessing because they grew up together. They're very they have a very close bond rather than actual psychic abilities. Um, so yeah, twin studies are really useful for psychological and medical studies.
We have a believer and a skeptic here, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, so that's all I got on this movie. It's very very fantasy and not sci-fi. So there's not a whole lot for me to go on here, but that's fine.
Man, I like how we were able to jump into this twin conversation though,
Yeah.
because because I always thought I have cousins who are twins, who are identical, and I used to get them mixed up all the time. But now there are distinct differences. I mean, I didn't grow up with them or anything, but I'm like, Eric is the one over there, and he's doing his thing, and Andy is the one over there, and you sort of sometimes the family sees him as like the free loving kind of person, or less private than Eric, less reserved than Eric is. And as a kid, I was like, these two people are the same person, and I just assumed that they as a kid you get a lot of things stuck in your head that just like twins can read each other's mind. I used to believe that if one twin got hurt, the other twin would feel it in some or
Well,
would know it.
and certainly the Del Toro's playing with this. That whole film is playing with that particular concept and the twin mythologies. There's tons of mythology that goes along with twins, like Castor and Pollux in the stars in the Greek mythology, and we've got the Gemini, symbol for that matter, astrology, and just twins in general have so many interesting myths and legends attached to them, and so many of these different sort of beliefs and perceptions that go along. And this film definitely draws on that shared history.
What I'm always curious about is you were talking earlier about how you thought your cousins were, same person. If it's early enough in their life and, given where they come from, the fact that they are, share so much of the same cells, before their personalities are molded and whatnot, who's to say they aren't actually the same person at some point in their life, up until a point?
So identical twins are formed when a zygote divides incorrectly, and instead of like staying together in one zygote, it becomes two. So yes, like for those first initial divisions until it breaks apart into two organisms, yeah, they are ostensibly the same zygote.
Fascinating. Gonna have to read more about twins, but not in a Mengele kind of way, in an average person kind of way.
It's really good you brought that up, considering the whole Nazi connection that we've been talking about today.
Oh yeah,
Really,
forgot about.
really good to just clarify. We're not interested in twins in a Mengele fashion.
I forgot about him because I try to forget about him.
Probably best.
For those of you who don't know, look it up, because you should have probably been taught about Dr. Mengele in the school system, and we're not going to teach you about it here.
Because it's gross. It's just real gross, and we're a PG podcast.
That is fair. So that is a final note on science. Hopefully, if we actually want to know, go to our subreddit. If you are a twin and you've experienced similar to Dr. Lauder's mother and her aunt, have a similar experience, we want to know about it, because like I want to be a believer that like twins have a psychic connection of some sort. I know we talk a lot about that they're sort of grown up at the same point, and it kind of makes them sort of the same person, that they're able to predict each other very well. But I want something really, really weird. Tell me a story. Yes, Superhero Movie Club, our Superhero Movie Club on Reddit.com.
Speaking of the subreddit, I'm just gonna tack this onto the science section here because it is science related. I forget who, but on our subreddit, I read a comment on the Dark Knight show notes, basically saying, "Hey, you're wrong about cell phones. They can produce ultrasonic frequencies, So using them as sonar is, like, on that front is not a problem. The problem with it is that they are unidirectional. They only, point sound in one direction, and that's a bigger issue in terms of their use as sonar.
Wait, we got a Reddit responder? Hold up.
Yeah.
Holy balls. that's the first one.
Yeah. I actually should look it up so I can shout them out. Hold on. I hope you can edit this out later.
Yeah, well, no, we're gonna edit this part out because I want to do another news break report where we answer some tweets and Reddit stuff and talk about the new theme and all the different stuff and all that. But that's awesome. So, but I'm gonna cut out that.
Okay.
But thank you.
Remind me about that when we do that.
Ballin', of course. Okay, so we're gonna just move right on into Dr. Lauder's section here as a professor of cultural studies. Is that in the right realm here?
Yes, it's definitely in the right realm. There's cultural studies encompasses a lot of stuff.
Okay. Well, I mean, we're going to talk a lot about myth here.
Yeah.
Because that's what Hellboy deals with. Is just like, let's take a myth, let's have some fun with it, and build a fantasy fun story.
Well, and that's definitely what's going on here. One of the things that I like most about the Del Toro movies is just how much they draw on all sorts of different elements of cultural myths from all sorts of places. The term for that is postmodern, where we're looking at lifting elements of different pieces of stories from all sorts of places to form a cohesive whole that's a different story altogether. And that's what's really going on here. When we have the Nuala and Nuada twin pairing, they're drawing on a twin mythos. They're drawing on the Celtic fairy and fae mythos out of Ireland and England, Britain, in general. They're drawing on, even the water elementals and things. That's actually Middle Eastern. The trolls are Eastern European rather. All of these, and tooth fairies. Who knows exactly where that started, but I know I looked for my quarters when I lost a tooth. So this is very much pieced together from all sorts of different traditions into a cohesive story, and that's the term for that is postmodern or post-postmodern. The crazier it gets, the more posts we can put in front of the word modern, really, when we think about it that way. And all of these myths, they come from everywhere, and I personally like the Celtic traditions because I've got Celtic roots in particular, but that whole concept of the fairies and the fairy kingdom and so forth, that is got really deep roots, particularly in the British Isles, and there's a lot of stories through that fairy mythos that are designed to sort of keep children out of trouble. Don't go near there because the fairies will come and take you away. Don't go to this particular spot because the fairies will come and take you away. I mean, there's this sort of you're very careful about where you go on the land. You're very careful about talking to fairies because they'll trick you into doing things you don't want to do, and maybe you'll end up sleeping under a fairy mound for 100 years. There's a lot of these sort of stories that are used sort of as illustrations of what will happen to you if you're not smart enough to stay out of trouble and to stay away from all of these folks. And the elementals and things are all kind of in that same sort of tradition, and these myths are kind of fun for that reason.
Reminds me of the Schubert piece, the Earl King, or Der Erlkönig, about the fairy king that comes and sweeps away a child in his father's arms and all that.
Holy cow!
Yeah,
I've never heard of that one.
It's kind of heavy.
Well, what I'm looking at is that they use the words, King Baelor of the elves and Prince Nuada, and when you search a little bit, you learn that they're not talking about elves, but these characters that existed in Irish mythology, but they're called Fomorians, which is a supernatural race that do have they apparently were gods who represent the harmful or destructive powers of nature. So the personifications of chaos, darkness, death, drought, blight, pestilence, all that stuff.
And again, back to stories that are trying to teach you to stay away from things you shouldn't be getting into. That's really what they are. Cautionary. That's the word I've been looking for this whole time. Cautionary tales. And Ireland and has a lot of those kinds of stories. I hadn't heard about the Fomorians one, frankly, but there's a lot of counterparts in other cultures too, like Rip Van Winkle. We're familiar with that story.
The man who napped for 20 years.
Yeah, more than that. I mean, it was what, 80 or 100 years. It was a long time. But the fairy stories are similar to that too. There's several of them that have that same kind of theme. And Rip Van Winkle is actually a Dutch-based story. So it's you're being tricked into losing part of your life for one reason or another, or you're making a deal with someone and coming out the wrong end of the stick. It's about being cautious about how you interact with people, being clever about how you conduct your life, and being really careful about the places you visit. And I suspect some of those early stories about fairies stealing away children and so forth had more to do with kids who were wandering off into the woods and getting lost and dying of exposure to the elements than actually being stolen away by the fairies. But there's that sort of cautionary thing that's going on with those. And it's kind of fun in this film because when you put all of those elements together the way that it has been done here, we've got elements of all of that in here. Be careful. Be careful about, how you approach the fairies and what's this golden army thing and there's a crown and if I get hurt, you get hurt. So you've got all this sort of stuff. And the bottom line is don't piss off the fairies, I guess.
Well, I mean, they I love their description of humans in that the humans were created with a hole in their heart that could never be filled. And I'm like, okay, thanks, Guillermo.
Yeah, well, it's another argument for twins and that twin mythology, right? Because you've always got your perfect half if you have a twin. That's the idea there.
Oh, okay. Because like, and the perspective just like the humans are allowed to exist even though they have an unbound hedonism. Just because they exist is like the fairy tale of from the elves' perspective. Also, I do want to talk about what you know about the character in the film, the Angel of Death, who Hellboy has a small run-in with. When he was excited when he's got that piece of metal stuck in him, and she removes it with magical powers.
Oh, well, and death as a personification, shows up in nearly every mythology, every culture there exists, because death is one thing none of us as humans can escape. That's it. And in a lot of cultures, that has been personified in a way to make it seem more friendly, depending upon the mythos that it's a part of, or to make it seem even darker than it is. And of course, the most recent and most famous manifestation of the Angel of Death in contemporary mythos is in the Harry Potter movies and in the Harry Potter series. Because by the end, spoilers, by the end, Harry Potter has assembled a collection of magical artifacts that makes him the master of death.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the tale of the three brothers in that series of stories is really about coming to terms with death.
I really hate it in Harry Potter how easy it is people to learn a spell that just murders someone in a second.
Right. Well, and J.K. Rowling is brilliant at this same sort of cobbling together of mythos and fairies and creatures and things we've been talking about too. Those books are full of all sorts of usurpations of different kinds of creatures and characters and magical structures, and hers was just a really unique spin on it that put that whole world together in one space. But that Angel of Death, that's constant across culture as a personification, as something that humans can talk to in the face of a concept that really is difficult for many people to deal with. So there's a personification there to make it easier to talk to accept. That's the idea, anyway.
I think still the filmic inspiration for a lot of these Angel of Death portrayals is still the old Ingmar Bergman. Yeah, I think that's it. The Seventh Seal, where much of the movie is around knights kind of dancing around, being claimed by death. They'll engage in a chess match, go back and forth about that, and eventually, spoiler alerts, death is kind of inevitable. So.
Well, and that's I think why that particular character keeps coming back, because a lot of storytellers are just, really not obsessed necessarily, but they're always wanting to try to tackle that topic at some point or another, because we all kind of have to deal with it at some point or another. And there's a lot of good stories that come from that. And I think you're right, it's Ingmar Bergman, that Grim Reaper sort of looking fellow. And that's, creepy enough. The scythe with the with the dark cloak and the covered face. The one that I think of when I think of the Grim Reaper is actually the one in Scrooged. That's probably the creepiest one for me. Yeah, the Grim Reaper.
I always think of Death from Terry Pratchett's Discworld. To me, he's the definitive angel of death. And if they ever make a movie about Discworld, I would have Death be voiced by Ron Perlman.
Oh,
ooh, yeah. Good choice.
I want to talk a little bit about that, because why is that? Is that an American thing? Is that an every culture thing that we perceive death as essentially the words Grim Reaper, a black cloak covered, carries a scythe? Where does that all come from? Like, why not?
Scythes are used to harvest grain, so there's that.
A time to reap, a time to sow. Actually, some of that imagery comes from Revelations in the Bible, the Christian Bible.
Okay.
Some of that particular imagery, but it really is a kind of a cross-cultural thing going on there. There's a lot of pagan symbolism in the Grim Reaper imagery as well, like the scythe, harvesting. It's harvest time is always an end. You're carrying away your seeds, for the future, but there's also hope to that there, because you are carrying away seeds to the future that you're harvesting. You're done. But there's a future involved. I mean, that's very symbolic and so forth.
And the black cloak, I mean, obviously color black has always been, or for the most part, always been, darkness, unknown, whatnot. But the cloak itself, is that also Revelations imagery, would you say?
Yeah,
No,
why
I think
isn't he
that's
wearing
Ingmar
a robe?
Oh, okay, so that's the Bergman. Okay.
That's the Bergman I'm thinking, and of course, more recently, Harry Potter. With his invisibility, cloak of invisibility, it's the same kind of thing.
I see.
Okay, I think we're going to have to cut that short, because we still want to talk about at least one more topic, and we're going to have to wrap things up pretty quick, because I got to make sure I get to the car dealership in time to pick up my car. And that last topic is, what's the deal with Hellboy 3? Because Hellboy 2 had, of course, that nice little cliffhanger of Liz is going to have 2 kids. And we still have not really reached the Hellboy deciding point of, is he going to face his destiny as the destroyer of worlds, or is he going to accept it?
Okay, I just realized that she's having twins, and they just killed twins, and that's like blowing my mind right now.
Oh, crap!
That's right.
Now we're there. But the news on Hellboy 3 has been so up and down over the years, whether it's one report or another. And if you're Guillermo del Toro, you're probably sick of it by now. But it's been like, he says he'll do it. He says he can't do it. Ron Perlman says he really wants to do it, but at the same time, it will kill him because at his age, with going through that prosthetic process again, like they probably had to get up for like 6 a.m., be in prosthetics, be in costume design for like 4 hours before they can even start shooting. At least 4 hours. Yeah.
The process of making the Hellboy movie is obviously very tedious, shall we say. And with how much they brought in on the second one, still in some middle ground as to whether it was quote-unquote worth it, although it was good.
Yeah, and, well, the current news is the most latest record, and, this is not, he's not written down on, Guillermo has not written down on this, but is that if the sequel to Pacific Rim does well, and first of all, that sequel has to get made. While it is financed in process, like there's still no guarantee. If that sequel does well, then Legendary has said that they will loosely said that they would finance a Hellboy 3 film, and Guillermo says it'll take about $120 million to make. While I don't think he's ever been given that much for a film. I don't remember how much Pacific Rim was budgeted at, but all I know is that Guillermo del Toro's movies barely make that much money in terms of big Hollywood films. Like none of his movies, except for Pacific Rim, have made more than $100 million domestically. And when you listen to this podcast, you hear that number at like 200, 300 all the time.
Pacific Rim was made for $190 million, by the way.
Okay.
What about Pan's Labyrinth?
That seemed like a little more of an independent venture. Let me just look that up real quick here.
Because that movie is real good, and I assumed it would have made money, but again, I don't know.
Yeah, it was Pan's Labyrinth was made for $19 million, made $83 million. So
yeah,
oh, okay.
I looked this up. Like every film that is directed by Guillermo del Toro, the most profitable film he has is Pacific Rim at $101 million domestically.
And it was a failure.
Yeah, that's a failure. A lot of studios don't really look at worldwide. They want to know the domestic because that's the more rock solid. That's where your numbers are more dependable. But if you adjust for inflation, Blade 2 apparently becomes his most profitable film, and it would have made $118 million.
Okay, that's kind of funny.
Okay, like you said, up and down in the news over the past few years even, Ron Perlman and Del Toro have said recently that they really want to get it made. So there's definitely interest there. The thing is, Guillermo del Toro has terrible luck at getting projects made. Throughout the past 10 years, he's had at least 6 project shelves. In the Mouth of Madness, The Haunted Mansion, Pacific Rim is basically dead now, or the sequel to it.
What?
Yeah,
I thought
they
they were
released
still
it.
making it.
No, they took it off the schedule. No production schedule whatsoever. He was going to make the Hobbit movies. Those fell through. Yeah.
Well, they didn't fall through. Someone else made them, right?
Right. At last I checked, they are movies, but not made by GDT. So.
And well, let's not to mention he has still shelved Justice League Dark.
Oh yeah, he's just been talking about that forever, but never gotten any steps made to make it. So.
Oh, Guillermo del Toro, the master of hype.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Except when it comes to money.
Oh yeah, no.
But anything else you guys want to talk about in the vein of Hellboy 2?
Maybe someday it'll get made.
Or I'm sorry, in the vein of Hellboy 3? Maybe someday it'll get made.
Yes.
I'm feeling like I have closure. We're good.
I don't feel closure. I want the big Hellboy epic. I really do. There's one more big story out there, and it's not. I want a trilogy of Hellboy films.
I think his best outlet would be Kickstarter.
Oh yeah.
Quite honestly.
I'm gonna say angel investor. I'm not gonna say Kickstarter. Even though for some reason there was I don't know if they're still making good success, but there's been spurs of just like studios being able to just kind of take advantage of the Kickstarter system to get movies made. I've got a lot to say on how that Veronica Mars movie got made, and I just got to say it's a sham.
It kind of is.
But I'm not going to talk about it now. I'm gonna wrap that up for another time. So that looks like it's going to do it today. Superfan Superhero Movie Club is recorded and produced by Triop Cop Productions. If you like what you hear, show us your support by going to iTunes, which is currently our main provider. But ever since they've done that recent software update, I think we might have to find a new podcast outlet because a lot of people are leaving the iTunes podcast format very fast. Or maybe it'll change by the time this gets released. But please go to the ratings of whatever you get this from, whether it's iTunes or we are on Stitcher as well as Podbean, and give us a rating. You don't have to write a review. We would appreciate a review. They're like little love letters that we treasure forever. But a 5-star, it needs to be 5 stars. I'm sorry. If it's anything less than 5 stars, I mean, just continue being apathetic. We don't you don't care about rating us, we don't care about you not giving us ratings then. But if it's a 5, if you're sitting on a 5, do it.
Oh shit! I'm the next one. Okay, hold on. If you want to talk about what we just were talking about here with us, check out our subreddit, reddit.com/r/superhero movie club. If you have any fun facts on the movie, if you want to tell me I'm wrong, tell Michael he's wrong.
Because love that.
Yeah, he's gonna love that. Actually, I'm gonna love it more than he does. But yeah, just we want to keep talking about these movies with you guys. So again, reddit.com/r/superhero movie club.
Oh, that and twin stories. Again, we want to reemphasize that.
Yes.
We want your fantasy twins. So, do you believe twins have a psychic connection, or is it all genetic?
How full of shit am I? We'll never know if you don't post.
SHMC also keeps up an active Twitter feed at SHMC or Superhero MC Derp. Go there, give us your questions, comments, concerns, stories about the first time you read about Joseph Mengele. That'll be fun.
Oh, no thanks.
Now I'm sad.
Oh, wow, way to just end this on a downer. Why don't we bring it back up? Thank you so much, Dr. Amy Louders, for joining us on the podcast again.
You are welcome. It's always a good time with you guys.
3 cheers.
Thank you.
Yay.
I gotta say, SHMC gets the freaking best guests on. I mean, the other week we had Andy Simon, who was great, and then of course Twitter Tom, who was just a dream, and now Amy's back for another show. It's fantastic. This is awesome. You're all great, and I'd love to put all of you on the show at once, but of course the just medium doesn't really allow for that. So, finally, it's time to say goodbye. That'll do it today. I'm your host, Michael Maurer.
James Skyler Houtsma.
And Ben Anderson.
With Dr. Amy Louders.
And I hope you all have a super week.
Bye.